Welcome to another edition of The Congregation. I am Dimitri Ravanis. He is Chris Phillips. You are listening to us, watching us, whichever way you are consuming. You're doing it on armchairallamericans.com. This is our SEC football podcast. And Chris, finally, week one has come and gone. And, you know, when we started the show, we talked about we don't like to look back. We'll only look back in terms of how it relates to looking forward. But this was week one. This was what we have waited for so long. I know you were at the South Carolina-NC State game, so I'm going to take that off the table for you for a second since South Carolina is your team. What else in the conference impressed you in week one?
Well, hard to go against Alabama. I think the way that they dominated, Florida State, and I think we were all looking forward to that game, and I think Bama might have taken a little bit of the fun out of it, really dominating that one 24-7, and then the other thing that impressed me was just the dumpster fire that is Texas A&M.
That's what I was going to say. Maybe impressed is the wrong word. That is the thing that left an impression on me.
Yeah, and really just the craziness that is the SEC East as well with some of those teams. I know we're going to get to in a little bit, but it was a fun first weekend. I'm really glad. Obviously, we're all glad football is back, but yeah, tons of storylines. But I mean, like I said, I think it's hard to go against Alabama and just what they did on the biggest stage. They looked really impressive. So.
Yeah, we'll get into this a little bit more. I actually kind of go a little bit different from you. I think you're right. It's hard to take away what they did, right? They dominated what I think was the second best team in the country coming in. I know that there's a lot of hype around Ohio State, but I think Thursday night we sort of saw that Ohio State team might be a tad flawed. So you can't take away what Alabama did. I just don't know if I look at that Alabama team and think they're going to be right back where they've been the last couple of seasons. But we'll get into that in a little bit. Actually, you know what? We'll preview it a little bit right now because going forward each week, Chris and I are both going to start the show by giving you our top four or our four playoff teams. That's not what they would be after this week. That is based on what we know right now. What do we expect the playoff picture to look like at the end of the season? So, Chris, I'll let you start. Who are your four playoff teams?
Right, so I'm going to go Alabama for sure. I mean, they looked absolutely awesome this weekend. I think they're the team to beat still in college football. From there, I'm going to go Ohio State. I still think, I think in week one, a lot of teams look kind of flawed, and definitely Indiana sort of exposed them. But Indiana in that game, if you watch, they made a ton of one-handed catches, and give credit to them how they played. But Ohio State, I thought, really showed their athleticism, their talent, pulled away at the end there. My three team, I'm actually going to go Oklahoma. I know Big 12 team sneaking in there, but I think Baker Mayfield's the real deal. It'll be really interesting to see how they do at the Shoe this weekend. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to kind of set the tone for them for the season. And then, I would have had Florida State, but Francois out. I'm going to go with a little bit of a dark horse. And we call it a dark horse. I'm actually going to go with Clemson. Right now, with what they did in week one, they didn't miss a beat. Kelly Bryant, with how good he looked. And I think they've got some weapons there. Dabo Swinney's recruited extremely well. So I think just going off what we saw last week, I think Clemson coming in there at the 4th spot, I think there's a really good chance of them winning the ACC again and, getting back in the playoff.
Yeah, I've got them at the 5 spot. I mean, that was the team that I was debating who do I put in the 4, and especially now with Francois down, I think that we saw Louisville is capable of being back there offensively where they were last year, but boy, did they take a step back defensively if you watched that game against Purdue. But my number 1, and again, I'm saying this is what I believe it will look like at the end of the season. I was impressed with Penn State as I was with anybody this week. So I've got Penn State as my number 1 at the end of the season. Alabama, my number 2, not super impressed with them. I just don't know that they have a test really before Auburn. And even if they lose that game and still go to the ACC championship game, I think they're in great shape. I'm going to put Stanford at 3. They didn't play this week, but boy, they look like they are ready to just bulldoze anybody in the Pac-12 in their week 1 game. And then I also have Oklahoma in my playoff picture. I have them at number 4. It's hard to picture the playoffs without the ACC, especially coming off of what that conference did last year. But everything about the conference now looks so shaky. I'm not 100% bought into Miami being the class of the Coastal yet. I still think Virginia Tech has a lot to say about that, and I don't know how far Virginia Tech can go with that redshirt freshman quarterback.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think Miami sort of I've never remembered such a team catching so much hype with sort of an unknown at quarterback like they have. But
Right.
I like the Stanford Cardinal pick for sure. I think Stanford's going to beat out Southern Cal for that spot. I mean, it definitely, Stanford's a good team. David Shaw's in a heck of a job, up there. So that'll be a great. I can't wait for that matchup too, Stanford USC. But yeah, I really liked what I saw out of Michigan as well. I need to see more out of them though. But yeah, I mean, I think Francois' injury at Florida State really shakes things up in the ACC, and it's sort of interesting. Could we see two SEC teams? I'm just not sure that the East has enough, to supply another contender. But a lot of football to be played, and that's why they play the game. So
I'll say I think the best shot for the SEC to get two teams in would be Alabama playing and losing to Auburn, who ends up 10-2, and if let's say there are only 3 undefeated or 1-loss teams, that might be the best shot that any conference has of getting a second team into the playoffs this year.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there for sure. I mean, it's sort of with the situation we had a couple of years ago with Alabama and LSU. It could be kind of the same thing. So
right. All right. Well, let's look forward now. You brought up Stanford and USC, and it begs the question: is Week 2 actually better than Week 1 this year in terms of headline games? You've got Oklahoma and Ohio State, as you already mentioned. You've got Auburn at Clemson. You've got Southern Cal and USC. I mean, this is a week where you don't have a game like Alabama, Florida State, and then there's a huge drop-off to the next most interesting game. Like, I feel like we have 3 games that you could have thrown these games in a hat, and I would have been satisfied no matter who you pulled out for game day to be at on Saturday.
Yeah, there may not be as many like 1 versus 3 or like these highlight primetime type games, but there's a ton of really, really good ones. Like you mentioned, just the ones you mentioned, Auburn, Clemson. I can't wait for that one. Georgia, Notre Dame has become really interesting over the last week. South Carolina, Missouri getting into conference play.
Especially South Carolina, Missouri, especially given that Missouri somehow is the favorite in that game.
Yeah, I won't even. Yeah. TCU, Arkansas is another good one. So I mean, there's definitely some good games within the SEC, and then outside the SEC as well. I mean, I think it's hard to beat the opening weekend of football just because we got football from Thursday to Monday. But Week 2 this season for sure has got its full slate. There's no question there.
It is going to be interesting, especially, you mentioned, or I guess we mentioned, South Carolina and Missouri kind of kicking off conference play within the SEC. That is sort of the case around the country. Aside from Ohio State and Indiana, you really didn't have many high-profile in-conference games anywhere last week. But, you've got South Carolina and Missouri, which may not be a headliner nationwide, but I do think there is this question coming off of the win over NC State of how legit South Carolina is. And also, it's going to be really interesting to see South Carolina's defense match up with Missouri's offense. And then on the other side of the ball, it might just be – this might be a battle of titans combined with a battle of special needs children, depending on, who's on which side of the ball with.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And we talked a little bit on the Spurs Up show. It's a really important game for South Carolina. I mean, you get the big win over NC State, and, a game that you were, again, the underdog, and a lot of people were obviously very high on NC State. I was there in person on Saturday, and I can tell you NC State's a good team. They've got a really good – they've got a really good front seven. Bradley Chubb is a real player. He's going to be playing on Sundays for a while, but it was a huge win for South Carolina. But the key for them now is, do you build off of it, or do you go to Missouri and stumble? And if you stumble, you really just undo everything you did in Week 1. If you really want to be a legitimate, contender, if you will, or go to a good bowl game this season. So that's a huge game for them. But yeah, based off of Week 1, I don't know that we're going to see much defense. Missouri scored 73. South Carolina gave up just over 500 yards total, right. And also Missouri giving up, 42 to Missouri State. So with those two offenses, it ought to be a fun shootout. I think the over-under right now is set at 74, and I'm not sure that's enough, to be honest.
Yeah, they are going to have to hope that it stays at the under if South Carolina is planning on winning that game. And I really think they can. I really think they will. But I still think if you are talking to me about teams that caught our attention in week one, whether that is because we think they're going to overachieve or they won one of the more high profile games, if you're asking me who won in week one and has to look better in week two, I'm still telling you South Carolina. Because I think that if South Carolina fans were not familiar with NC State stuff before Saturday, they certainly understood what it was. I mean, in terms of, I don't think it matters who you're rooting for. I think you can acknowledge Jalen Samuels got a bad spot on that fourth down near the end of the game, and the fumbles that North Carolina State had. It's not that South Carolina didn't play well. It's that North Carolina State shot themselves in the foot too often at the most inconvenient of times. And so I do want to see South Carolina go in, play an inferior opponent, which North Carolina State wasn't, but I want to see them go in, play an inferior opponent, and just dominate them. I wrote about this for Garnet and Black Attack over at SB Nation earlier in the year. We sort of did our wish list of what we want to see for South Carolina this season. And I pointed to this game and I said, I want to see South Carolina just stomp the crap out of somebody. And Missouri seems like the most ideal candidate because if the defense plays up to potential, you don't have to worry about their defense keeping you from scoring.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think it will be a little bit different of a ball game this weekend, just for the simple fact that I think they're going to get a lot more running the football. I think that was something they sort of stayed away from due to the strength of the NC State Wolfpack team, which was their defensive line. They had a lot of what I thought was a great game plan, and what I thought they should have done before the game was Kurt Roper devised up a lot of quick outs, a lot of quick passes, get the ball quickly out of Jake Bentley's hands, and it worked for him. And then I think a lot of the yardage on the other side, while NC State did have a bunch of yardage, I think that, again, was sort of South Carolina's defensive plan. They were going to give them the underneath pass. In the first half, obviously, NC State was killing them with the dump off. Jalen Samuels and Nyheim Hines for NC State are really, really good players. And you can tell Ryan Finley's a really seasoned quarterback. He knows where to put the football. He takes care of the football, the majority of the time. I think in the second half, though, what you saw with South Carolina, once they kind of, won first down, if you will, and got NC State into some more obvious passing situations, they were able to get a pass rush. 4 sacks in the second half. So, yeah, that's definitely a big one I'm looking forward to. I tell you the one I'm really looking forward to as well, and I hate that it's the same time, is I want to see what Jarrett Stidham does at Clemson in a hostile environment. I know he played, I guess it was at Baylor. He's played, and but this is going to be a real test for him. And it's just interesting. It'll be interesting to see kind of the layoff of not playing in a huge environment like that. I know he got played in Auburn last week, but going on the road to Clemson, that'll be a really, really fun game to watch.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I thought about looking at this game, especially after watching Clemson this week, is it's going to be really interesting to see which of these two quarterbacks makes the most of their situation, because Stidham is certainly more talented, I think, than Kelly Bryant. But I don't think he's got the talent around him that Kelly Bryant does. Think about everything that Clemson lost off their national championship team and then realize that the guys they have coming back are pretty damn good. So I don't know how good Kelly Bryant has to be, just like last year with Jalen Hurts. I don't know how good that dude really had to be to get Alabama into the position they did. I sort of feel the same way about Kelly Bryant this year in Clemson.
Yeah, I think the thing more so with Kelly Bryant that I think Clemson fans should be looking for, and really the entire country, last year when Clemson went on that, the run, they won the national championship, they were the best team in college football. It wasn't so much to me about it was Deshaun Watson, but it was the plays he made under pressure,
right? The
throws where everything was on the line and he was calm, cool, and collected. And you can be the most talented guy in the world, but if you can't keep your poise and keep your composure in those type of moments, you're not going to win a lot of big games. And even at home, this is going to be a really big game. This is a huge game for Clemson on the national spotlight. So another SEC-ACC matchup, just like we saw in week one, where obviously the SEC got the better of the ACC, but it'll be a really, really interesting game. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am too. I think Kelly Bryant learning under Deshaun Watson, not just learning under Deshaun Watson in terms of his skill set, but last year it was really interesting doing the pregame show for that team on ESPN 94.9 in Columbia. It was really interesting watching Clemson and watching highlights each week, sort of recap before I would go on the air. I think Kelly Bryant is going to benefit not just from learning under a dude like Deshaun Watson in terms of his talent and what his demeanor and poise allows him to do. But learning under Deshaun Watson last year, who I don't know if you remember, before the season started, Deshaun Watson was making a big deal out of he was not going to be a quote unquote mobile quarterback in 2016. He was going to try and really highlight what a good passer he was. And you sort of saw how much Clemson struggled those first few weeks when there were times Deshaun Watson was so committed to showing scouts and fans and the media that he was perfectly comfortable staying in the pocket, that he would miss out on opportunities to make huge plays with his legs. And I think it was around the time that Deshaun Watson got comfortable with, I'm not a mobile quarterback. I'm not a pocket quarterback. I'm Deshaun Watson. Around the time he got comfortable with what his talents were is when that team really started to look like a national championship caliber team. And so I think Kelly Bryant, watching the guy in front of him go through that, let's call it a personality struggle, is about the best learn by example you could possibly have when you're taking over from a guy like that. Does that make sense? That's a
no,
long
I absolutely
way.
agree. I remember that happening last year when Watson came out and said, I'm not a dual threat quarterback, and it was sort of like, hey, just be who you are. So I agree with you. I think once he kind of identified what he was and just let himself go out there and play, it obviously benefited and took the pressure off him. The question I have for you, kind of, I know we were going to talk about it. I'm kind of interested to get your opinion. Do we know more or less about the SEC East coming into week 2 than we did going into week 1? I mean,
so here is what I will say. I think at the top, I'm a little bit confused because I feel like we know a lot about Georgia. Like I feel like watching that game against App State, I feel like Georgia is good enough that they could surprise Alabama or Auburn in the SEC championship game and actually sneak themselves into the playoffs. But I don't know what Georgia is going to be when Eason comes back, right? I mean, like Fromm showed a whole lot of ability, and certainly you don't have to be that good of a passer when you have Chubb and Michelle in your backfield doing what they did against App State. But I think Fromm certainly, exceeded everybody's expectations, right? Like, I don't think that's unfair to say at all. But I do wonder, are we going to see the kind of improvement from Jacob Eason? Are we really going to see that improvement that we've been promised we were going to see all offseason long? I feel like if Eason is where everybody's been saying he actually is when he comes back from injury, Georgia could be a dangerous team, man.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, you kind of know what Georgia is, especially with Chubb and Michelle. I'm interested to see how long he's going to be out.
Yeah.
Just because those type of injuries, I mean, you never want to rush a guy back too quick. And I know they said like 2 to 6 weeks, which is, just a huge time frame. And, from what I've been hearing around, from Athens, is that people were really confident in Jake Fromm and kind of felt like, even though Eason, obviously the 5-star guy, is the golden child in Athens, he's our quarterback, that a lot of people feel really good about Fromm. Some people think he fits their offense better. But my only rebuttal to that is, as good as a true freshman might be, South Carolina is one team that learned this the hard way, and many other teams that have had freshman quarterbacks. You take a guy on the road like that, I mean, you got to go to South Bend this weekend. You got to go to Knoxville. If he's not back by then, you got to go to Auburn. I mean, it's just a lot of, Jake Fromm, I think his number one job is going to be don't play Georgia out of the SEC East.
Right. I agree with you. Like I am pretty firm about, I don't buy the hype around Notre Dame. I don't think Georgia is in the kind of trouble this week that a lot of people are talking about that they might be. But I don't know how Georgia is going to beat Tennessee with a true freshman quarterback. And I don't even think Tennessee's that good. I don't know how they're going to beat South Carolina with a true freshman quarterback. And I don't think South Carolina is that kind of good. I just think that suddenly you become very one-dimensional if you don't have Eason's cannon in there. And you're right. Like, there was a lot about what Fromm did that looked, I'm not going to say better than Eason, but I will say better than Eason did this time last year. Like, he just instantly looked way more comfortable than Eason did as a true freshman. That being said, true freshmen, they tend to fall apart at the most inconvenient of times for these teams sometimes. So I would never last year have put money on Alabama winning a national championship. And I'm certainly not going to do that with a team with a lot less talent around a true freshman in terms of how far they can go.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I just, I agree with you again that I think it's just going to be tough for Georgia if, you're relying on a running game that, while good, obviously Nick Chubb is, I think, one of the guys who's not even getting talked about enough in the preseason or now. One of the best running backs I think he could be in the country at Michelle. But you're leaning on an offensive line that was not very good last year, to be blunt. And, and you're going to be, if you get in a situation where you get down a touchdown or 2 touchdowns and you got to ask a kid like Jake Fromm to lead you back, it's going to be a tall task to ask. So, like I said, I just think the East is, I think that's one reason I think South Carolina fans are feeling so giddy after week 1 is not so much that they came out of that game looking like world beaters, but I think the East just looks like it's just up for the taking. I mean, the Florida Gators, my God, let me
ask you a question about the Florida Gators, and it's very similar to what you just asked me. My gut wants to say I don't think we actually know much about Florida yet, but I kind of feel like we know all we need to about Florida at this point. I don't know how much having those 10 guys back would have made a difference, other than it just would have given Florida a little more depth. And I know that Michigan is slowly becoming what Alabama is right now, where you can lose a 5-star and you've got another one on the bench. But Michigan had to replace 17 starters from last year's team on both sides of the ball combined. And Florida just wasn't in it at all. From probably about what you'd say maybe like 3 minutes left in the second quarter on. I mean, Michigan just had their way with Florida.
Yeah, I mean, really the thing you need to know about the game, they scored 17 points and both touchdowns are from pick sixes. So, I mean, it really is, we talked about it a little bit, it really is mind-blowing that, Jim McElwain comes in as this offensive guru and they just still at Florida can't get a quarterback. I mean, it's just kind of been the story of the Florida Gators for – the past multiple years. I mean, I can't even count, but they just can't seem to find a quarterback. It's going to be Felipe Franks going from here on out, obviously. But, the thing about Florida, you sort of have to kind of believe they've still got a lot of talent on defense. Michigan's a really good team. I think they were almost a little overlooked and underrated even coming into this game. But, yeah, I mean, Florida's got a ton of questions coming into week 2. And, that Florida-Tennessee game week 3 even will be a really good test of both of those teams and probably will help shake out the East a little bit. But, yeah, I mean, Florida, it's definitely not the way you want to start the year. I mean, they definitely had a rough beginning. So it'll be interesting to see just how that plays out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I know that when you get that sort of shock of a huge chunk of your guys that you're relying on are not going to play, when you get that shock as late as you did, it's going to throw some things into disarray. But just the sloppiness, even when they were in control of the game, the sloppiness of Florida on offense, of the center stepping on Felipe Franks's foot as he was under center, and then on top of that, Franks, as he's going down, trying to make a play that any veteran quarterback would know. That's one of those you just have to eat it and take the sack. There was just so much, I guess growing pains is the right way to say it. There was just so much about Florida that looked like, I wanted to go, guys, come on. Like, you have at least played 4 years of high school football, right? You should know better than what you're doing right now at the very least.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, like I said, it's, you have a freshman quarterback in there, so you kind of expect to take your licks. But, man, I mean, they just look so underwhelming. I mean, it looks like you didn't even practice in the preseason. Right. You don't really know what's going on. So, yeah, there's a lot of questions surrounding Jim McElwain and the guys down in Gainesville.
Let's step down to that next tier of the SEC East, just based on where we thought these teams were going to be in the preseason. You're pretty high on South Carolina in terms of their chances to actually contend in this division.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, just looking at it really objectively, because I think everyone obviously knows that, I cover South Carolina for Armchair Americans, but, really looking at it objectively, I just think South Carolina, while they're still not world beaters on defense, I think they're really opportunistic, and I think they're that kind of pesky team that they have a quarterback and they have an offense that's going to keep them in every single game. And I mean, looking at the offenses right now in the SEC East, I mean, I think NC State honestly has one of the better front sevens they're going to face all season long, maybe behind Georgia and Clemson. So, I mean, like I said, I just think they have an offense. They have a quarterback that's going to keep them in every game. Deebo Samuel looks like a real playmaker. They've got a plethora of good running backs, although they didn't show it Saturday. They've got guys behind Deebo Samuel, 2 great tight ends. If they can make a couple plays on defense here or there and kind of muddy the waters, spring an upset, maybe somewhere they're not supposed to win, maybe at a Georgia, even, at a Texas A&M, where I don't know how that game's looking now. We'll have to see like three or 4 weeks down the road. But South Carolina could be a really interesting team. And then Tennessee, from what I saw from them, I think they'd be the other one last night, against the game against Georgia Tech. Crazy win there, obviously. I mean, they gave up like 7,000 rushing yards, but
right.
Normandy, they had the one impressive drive. I don't really know what to make of them quite yet. I don't really know how good Georgia Tech is. And then there's Kentucky, I think, as well. I think they're another team we just don't know quite enough about yet. They got a 7-point win against Southern Miss. But, I think right now, if you had to look at the week one who had the most impressive win in the East, I think it had to be South Carolina. And I just think with their offense, and when you have a quarterback like Jake Bentley, who's poised, who has arm talent, who can make some scrambles like we saw Saturday, and, he's just a real gamer, you have hope. So I just think South Carolina right now has the most hope of any of those middle tier teams.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I think the thing that South Carolina, I think, needs to be optimistic about on offense, especially, is you're right. Deebo Samuel is a playmaker. I still, in my heart of hearts, don't believe natural talent-wise, I still don't believe he's as talented as Brian Edwards could be. Like, I think if Edwards...
Right. No, I agree with you. I
think if Edwards puts it all together, that team is really tough to stop on offense. What do we know about Sky Moore so far?
Yeah, he's healthy. I mean, I think he's good to go. From what Coach Muschamp said, it just sounded like he was gassed at the end of the game. I know he kind of went down, walked off the field in his own power. But, I mean, from what we saw, he had 8 tackles Saturday. And I think really the Sky Moore effect was just as big, if not bigger, than him being in the game and making plays himself. But TJ Brunson, his colleague next to him at linebacker, had 16 tackles.
Yeah.
And we had talked about in the preseason that just having Sky Moore back, the quarterback of your defense, putting guys in the right position. We thought that, TJ Brunson was someone this coaching staff had raved on and really talked about. And we thought he would benefit really the most from Sky Moore returning because he would be in the right position. He gets to learn from a guy like a Sky Moore. And it looked like it really showed on Saturday. I mean, he looked great. I thought Sky Moore was flying around the field too. He really looked back to his old self. I mean, I don't want South Carolina fans or just people in general to think if he doesn't get 2 interceptions in a game, he's not the Sky Moore of old. I mean, he was definitely out there making plays. And I mean, the defense for South Carolina, while they may have given up a ton of yards and still gave up 28 points to NC State, I will tell you the one big improvement from 16 to 17 is the team. They looked a lot faster. They were really flying around the ball, getting to the ball. They were a lot more sure tackling. So it'll be interesting to see how that defense develops, but they're going to have to do it in a hurry because they face a really high-powered Missouri Tigers offense and on the road as well. So
yeah, one of the things that or one of the guys that actually impressed me, and it's weird to say this because if you look at the box score, he has literally no measurable stat that tells you just how impressive Jemias Williams, the true freshman, actually was and what he sort of gave to that offense. There were times that Ryan Finley just was not throwing the ball in Williams' direction. And like I said, there's no stat that tells you what he did to take receivers away. It was just the fact that every time they would have Jemias in the game and he would be matched up on Hines coming underneath, Hines was out of it. He was on Hines like glue every time that he was paired with Hines underneath. I think that there is a lot of reason to be optimistic about the future of South Carolina. I do want to see them flat out win a game, which I think they did against NC State, but they were certainly aided by NC State shooting themselves in the foot. And, at the end, there were a couple of calls. It just went South Carolina's way. That's part of the game, right? Tennessee, this is why I told you last week, Butch Jones is not on the hot seat. I'm sorry. I think that team rallied around Butch Jones. And one of the things that I think you could see at the end of that game last night, Butch Jones never got to the point where he was turning purple screaming. I don't know if that is a corner that he has turned, but he never seemed to be, when they showed him on the sideline, he never gave you the impression that he was panicked or he thought his team was out of it. Now, I think Tennessee lost a ton from last year. I think last year was probably the best shot that Butch Jones was ever going to have to win a division. But I think Tennessee might be a little bit better than we were giving them credit for at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, I mean, Butch Jones is still, they've done a good job recruiting there. I mean, he's definitely got some talented players. Like I said, I just think there's so much we don't know about them. I mean, they obviously scored 42 points, which was enough to get the W, but the defense obviously, but against Georgia Tech's option attack, there's a lot of teams that give up a lot of rushing yards. But yeah, I mean, that was a great win for them. I mean, great year after the way they ended 2016, losing to South Carolina, losing to Vanderbilt. They needed a win. So that was a big win, definitely for Butch Jones. And, I'm sure that the coaches on the hot seat in college football would much rather be in Butch Jones' seat than Kevin Sumlin's today.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll certainly talk about that a little bit later on. All right, real fast, because I do want to get to the West. Are we buying into this hype that Mark Stoops is building something at Kentucky? Because I'll start, I absolutely am not. I think that is a team that has to play lights out on defense to beat a Southern Miss. I think that's what we saw this week. I will not buy that Mark Stoops is building something at Kentucky until I see him get to a second bowl game.
Yeah, I mean, I think Kentucky can be a solid 6 or 7 win team. I'm not buying into the hype that Kentucky is going to realistically challenge to win the SEC East. I mean, they've got some pieces there. They've got a decent they've got a quarterback in Johnson, but it's one of those things with Kentucky again. You got to show you got to show me. It's just the bottom line. I mean, we're gonna, like I said, things are gonna sort themselves out in the next couple of weeks. Kentucky travels to South Carolina week 3, and what it should be a really huge game, especially if South Carolina wins this weekend. But yeah, it's one of those things with Kentucky. You really just got to show me. And it seems like Kentucky over the past couple of years, as good as much as they've improved, rather, they still find ways to lose games. And it's just one of those things that, Mark Stoops, they're going to have a breakthrough year eventually if they really want to be taken seriously. But no, to answer your question, I'm not buying into a lot of – I mean, Kentucky was an extremely hyped team in the preseason. I'm not buying it.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, let's move over to the West. I will start with thoughts on Alabama. Look, defense, they just reloaded like they do every year. They looked great on defense. Special teams, they were as disciplined, if not more so, than you expect a Nick Saban coach team to be in week 1 on special teams. Offensively, I don't know how far this team can go. And I know that a lot of the focus is on Jalen Hurts, particularly overthrowing is it Robert Foster? I think he overthrew in the end zone there. That would have been, that would have been his prettiest pass of the night. What I think concerns me more is, say what you want to about Lane Kiffin, there were times you didn't know what was coming next from Alabama's offense. Brian Daboll seems to have a maybe half-page long playbook. I mean, Alabama ran 4 different plays in that game, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, what did Jalen Hurts? He had under 100 passing yards, right?
He had, 96 passing yards, and 89 of them went to Calvin Ridley.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the question, can they continue to win like that with Jalen Hurts? I mean, I don't know who's going to beat them. I don't know who's good enough to match up with, in the SEC at least, to match up with Alabama. Now, do I think they can win a national championship with that type of offense? No, I just don't see it. I don't care how good the defense is. But, I mean, they look like a Nick Saban team. Like you said, they're really disciplined. They took advantage of the mistakes that Florida State made. The only thing I was disappointed with is I thought the biggest game of the weekend didn't necessarily live up to the hype that we had all hoped. But I think that's just because Alabama took control of the game. And, yeah, I mean, it was a great win for them. But, yeah, I think Hurts is just – like we were saying, he's got to improve downfield passing. It just and I really thought it was a really vanilla playbook. Maybe they weren't showing everything in week 1, but I don't know why you would hide anything against the number 3 team in the country, in the biggest game of the weekend. I don't see why you would do that. So it really makes you wonder what's going on. It really makes you wonder how much did they really lose with Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things that, I'm not going to say don't panic at all about, Florida State really challenged Alabama's run game. I mean, they did. They did not fall into the trap that so many teams do of letting those big, powerful backs get to the second level. Once that was all of Bo Scarborough's success last year, is once he got through the line, he was very tough to bring down in the open field. I think Florida State is a level above most defenses in the country, right? So I don't know that that's going to be a problem in, was it week 5 or 6 that they play Texas A&M or Arkansas? but it was something that kind of caught my eye. Of boy, this running game is not clicking the way we're used to seeing Alabama's run game click in week one. I was filling in on a radio show in Greensboro, North Carolina. This was maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the season started. And I had on as a guest Wes Durham, who calls ACC games on Fox Sports. And I was telling him, I do understand how good Florida State is going to be, but if Nick Saban does anything well, it is get his team focused for week one. And Wes's point was, yeah, but look at who they have played in week one in the past. They've never played a team like Florida State before. And I think that showed. I really think that showed in the first half that Florida State clearly was a step above the competition that Alabama has been playing in these neutral site games. But as it went on, man, as the game went on, for all of the hype that Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit were giving to Jimbo Fisher's ability to make adjustments at halftime, I mean, I think it just showed, like, even the next best guy in the country at doing that is still far away from Nick Saban at this point.
Yeah, I think simply put, there's two things that Alabama and Nick Saban don't do. He doesn't lose the former assistants, and they don't lose the openers. You give Nick Saban that long to get his team ready and prepared, and it's just a tall task. I mean, it's just all you can really say. He just doesn't do it. Yeah, I mean, I was thoroughly impressed with Alabama. I still think they're the class of the SEC. And, yeah, I mean, I think Saban's a cut above, every other coach. I mean, it definitely – I hated it really for Florida State to lose Deondre Francois. I think
me too.
It was terrible to see him go down, and it's a shame, like a kid like that who's really taking his licks for Florida State, isn't going to get to play the year. But, yeah, I mean, Alabama, it might make teams actually think twice about scheduling them for the opening weekend in these kickoff games, because, I mean, you give Saban that long and you got a tall task ahead. So,
as we say that, like, it was just announced earlier today that Miami is going to be playing at opening weekend 2021 in Atlanta. Thoughts about LSU in week one?
Yeah, I thought they would. I thought they'd kind of perform how they did. I mean, I watched BYU in the week 0 game. They didn't really impress me at all. And
yeah,
I thought LSU would really just out athlete them. Obviously, they pitched a shutout, won 27-0. Looked really good on defense. I think still it's sort of up in the air with LSU. They've got a really good chance. I mean, they've got Chattanooga at Mississippi State, Syracuse, and Troy to close out September. They got a really realistic shot to go 5-0 before they head to Florida to the Swamp for the first Saturday in October. So LSU's a really interesting team too. If they can get that offense rolling, I think they've got the athletes on defense. There's no question about that.
Yeah, that's the thing that I sort of took away from that game in terms of projecting forward is I know there are a lot of people that think as the season goes on, Danny Etling is going to take a real step forward and that passing game is going to take a real step forward, because even if Etling isn't suddenly, it doesn't overnight turn into a 5-star quarterback, he's still throwing to, 4 guys that are at least 6'4", and he's got the most experienced offensive line in the SEC in terms of starts together. So it's really hard to picture him not being put in a situation to succeed more than he did last year. But even still, boy, that offense just it's going to go as Darius Geis goes all season, which isn't the worst thing in the world, right? Like, if you're going to have to be tied to one running back in the SEC, I think even more than Nick Chubb, that's probably who you want to be tied to. I just, I'm already skeptical of Ed Orgeron as the head coach. I know Matt Canada has worked miracles before. I just don't know in a division with a defense like Alabama, and let's not discount defenses like Ole Miss and Auburn, who've been recruiting really well on that side of the ball too. Can you be that one-dimensional in the biggest of games?
Yeah, and like you said, in the biggest of games, you mentioned Ed Orgeron. I mean, again, do we really think there's anybody in the West or in the SEC for that matter that's going to out-coach Nick Saban? I mean, it's just – I don't think late in the game it's just not going to happen. I don't think Ed Orgeron is going to pull anything out of his sleeve to beat a Nick Saban, especially on the road at their place.
Hey, look, last year was the perfect example of what Nick Saban is, or excuse me, of what Ed Orgeron is going to be in those games, right? He put together a great defensive plan against Alabama last year. And at the end of the day, what killed him is they could not score points.
Yeah, I mean, it's been the story of LSU for sure. But, yeah, I think, like you said, their offense goes with Darius Geis. He's one of the best backs in the country. He's a pleasure to watch. And never thought I would, people would forget about Leonard Fournette so quickly, but you got a guy like that. I mean, he's electric with the ball in his hands. So they're going to go as he goes. And, it'll be really be up to the quarterbacks there at LSU just to take care of the football and, not lose the games for them. Sort of similar to Georgia, in my opinion. I mean, just keep them in ball games and let their playmakers make plays for them.
All right, so if we're talking about the other team that we consider at the top of the West this season, it is Auburn, and forget about the rest of the team. The only thing that anybody wants to know or wants to talk about with Auburn is Jarrett Stidham. I thought coming out of this game, or I should say going into this game, a lot was made of how high the ceiling can be for Jarrett Stidham. I mean, there are Auburn fans that are swearing this is the second coming of Cam Newton. Looks more like the second coming of Nick Marshall to me. I mean, I think that this guy is going to be very good at what he does well, but I don't think he is that once-in-a-generation talent that maybe the media oversold before we actually saw him take the field in an Auburn jersey.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think his numbers were overwhelmingly good, but I will, at least point out that he was without a couple of weapons on Saturday. No, Cameron Petway didn't play. They had one other receiver out due to some suspensions they had to issue out. So, I mean, I thought for what he had, I mean, week one against Georgia Southern, who's not really a good team. I don't think we were going to find out a lot anyways. I definitely think he's got the arm talent for it, but it's the real test is going to come this weekend. You go to Clemson, and not just testing his talent, his arm, his legs, but his poise. I mean, it's can he lead Auburn? Can he actually lead this football team into a hostile environment, in a night game and come out with a W? So it's going to be really, really intriguing to see how he plays. But, yeah, he's another guy that really should lean on guys like Cam Martin, Kerryon Johnson. Both guys had 136 yards rushing apiece. 2 touchdowns combined between the two of those guys. I mean, Auburn still loves to run the football. We know that. And
sure. And I mean, that is even the year that Cam Newton took him to a national championship in 2010. That was still a offense built around a lot of run options, even though you had, what is, in my opinion, the best college quarterback we've ever seen on that roster. To me, it's not so much about the numbers that Stidham did or did not put up. And, you bring up a good point, right? Like, this was Georgia Southern. This was the first time that he was officially in an Auburn jersey. He just didn't look crisp. And to me, I guess given the way that Stidham was sold, given the way that Malzahn's offense with a talent like Jarrett Stidham was sold in the offseason, I expected him to come out and just be completing laser beam after laser beam against a vastly inferior team like Georgia State. And there was nothing about the way Stidham played in that game that made me think, okay, this guy is special on the level of a Sam Darnold or a Josh Rosen or anything like that, which is what I was led to believe we were going to see with him in that offense.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. He looked underwhelming, but again, I just stick to the thing that I think this is his first game in a big-time setting in 2 years. I mean, the guy, he looked rusty. He just looked really, really rusty. Right. But like I said, he'll have to shake off the cobwebs fast going to up to Clemson for that game. But, yeah, I mean, that's going to tell the story. And like you said, against Georgia Southern, we weren't going to really find out much. But, yeah, I mean, for all the hype we heard, I agree with you. And I think he was an all-SEC selection in the preseason. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously huge honors for a guy that hasn't taken a snap in this conference. So,
and you bring up a good point, right? Like the rust, because it's not like he left Baylor and played a year at JUCO. He straight up did not play last year. So you're right. I mean, we do need to give him a little bit of slack for the level of rust a guy with that kind of talent has to shake off to get back to the level we expect to see him at.
Yeah, but like I said, he'll have to shake it off fast because Clemson's defensive line will do him no favors. So it's going to be interesting. Like I said, he has to be that leader. I mean, Auburn absolutely needs that. They're realistically wanting to going to try to challenge Alabama and be that team in the playoff. I think if he plays up to his capabilities, they can be that team. But they can't have a C+ Jarrett Stidham and expect that.
Right. I agree with you completely there. All right. Let's sort of switch gears here a little bit because the SEC on CBS returns this week, and it will be the first year, at least in this millennia, that we see the SEC on CBS without Uncle Vern. And I will tell you this right now, Chris. I don't know how you felt about the Gary Vern team. I could watch Vern Lundquist read the phone book and be thoroughly entertained. Gary Danielson, I don't need him in my life at all. I'm very worried about what we're going to see this year on CBS.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie to you. I don't hate a lot of broadcasters. There's not a lot of broadcasters I just truly dislike, like watching or listening to. I feel like with Vern and Gary, it was kind of like I never knew any different. It was sort of like your grandpa, your uncle, and people you grew up with watching games on CBS. I mean, I remember, I was, just my entire life just seeing them call the games, and it's going to be weird this year for sure. But yeah, I never really understood the hate for those guys. I knew a lot of people that just couldn't stand them, and I'm like, yeah. Come on. So, I mean, I don't know. Like I said, there's not a lot of commentators that I really dislike or don't like listening to, but those two were like I said, they not only they're, commentators, but they sort of felt like, they were guests in your home on a Saturday, if you will, if that makes sense.
To me, sure. Like I understood the frustration with people when when Vern Lundquist would tell you a play that just happened actually was not the play that just happened. Like I totally get that frustration. But between the chortle and the he had a really good sense of humor. I really enjoyed watching a game that Vern Lundquist was calling, and I like to tell you how much I enjoyed Vern Lundquist calling games. I don't like college basketball at all. Like, I love the NBA. I hate college basketball. But in the tournament, would seek out the games Vern was calling because he is that kind of entertaining. Gary Danielson seemed like, particularly towards the end of their partnership, that he didn't want anything to do with Vern's sense of humor. He didn't want anything to do with anything that wasn't SEC football. Like he had his chart about the fastball offense, and he was going to show you 6 freaking times a game because I guess he gets paid a bonus based on how many times he shows that. I am not a huge Gary Danielson guy, if you cannot tell. And I do wonder what a broadcast is going to look like with Gary Danielson, who is so... we're just here to talk about football, and Brad Nessler, who has no personality to speak of.
Yeah, it'll be. I look at Gary Danielson almost as like the what's his name, Al Cowlings or whatever that does the Sunday Night Football. He's kind of like the Al Cowlings of college football, SEC on CBS.
You mean Chris?
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Al Cowlings was the one that helped OJ escape.
There you go. I don't know why that name came to mind, but yeah. Yeah, I just break it. Like I agree with you, breaking on the play. I actually really like Nessler. I really like Nessler. I think it's because I'm still like obsessed with the NCAA football game.
I just started your dynasty last week.
Yeah, just always hear Nessler. So it'll be of all the people they could have gotten. I mean, he's a pretty good one.
Okay, you're right in terms of like because of the NCAA football game, and I know it's stereotyping, but I do think it is true that there are more of us in this part of the country that still play that game, that held on to their PS3 to keep playing that game than anywhere else, right? So it makes sense. It makes sense to put him on the marquee SEC broadcast. But part of the reason Vern was sort of encouraged to go ahead and retire is that he was 77, going to be 78 this year. And they got younger with a 61-year-old dude. I mean, at some point, don't they need to sort of say, hey, if we think Carter Blackburn is the guy, and if you've heard him call a game on CBS Sports Network, he's really good. What would be so wrong with putting Carter Blackburn in there and letting him be your guy for the next 20 years?
Yeah, I think they more so looked at it as like we need to get a name.
Yeah, I agree.
That's the only thing I can think. I mean, Brad Nessler's a name. People know who he is, and he sort of gets the benefit of the doubt because he's been around so long and had so many memorable calls. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of like looking for a college football coach. Really, in college football, why not go with the young gunslinger that's going to go out there and recruit? But some people just want a name. I mean, it's it kind of depends on what you're looking for. So I'm not mad with Nessler. I would have been open to somebody else, but
yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how those two. I agree with you though. It'll be interesting to see how Nessler and Gary Danielson kind of mesh together. That'll be kind of weird in my opinion, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's just going to be a huge personality void left with Vern Lundquist having retired this year. All right. Every week at the end of the show, we're going to do some sort of different, let's call it game for lack of a better word, right? Like last week we did 10 words or less. This week, dumb questions from Dimitri. I've sort of in my sports radio career sort of built everything I do around the idea that, yes, I'm in sports radio now, but I came from rock radio. So, and none of this I will ever take that seriously. So, Chris, whether you want to or not, you are going to be subjected to these sorts of dumb questions right now.
I'm ready for it.
All right, I got 5 for you. Ready?
Absolutely ready.
First of all, how old a guy are you?
I'm actually 26. So I was looking at the first question. I was like, there's only one of those bands I don't know. So
okay, that's good. You know. That's good that there's only one you don't know. Number 1, power rank these 5 90s bands from SEC country. Better Than Ezra from New Orleans, so we'll have them representing LSU. Black Crowes from Atlanta, we'll have them representing Georgia. Creed, even though they are from Tallahassee, that is still Florida. Sheryl Crow, this one I don't feel good about because even though she did go to Mizzou, she went to Mizzou in the Big 8 days. And then Hootie and the Blowfish, of course, from South Carolina.
Well, I'm of course going to have to rank Hootie and the Blowfish number 1. The guy Darius, love Hootie. I've seen them live before, so I'm going to go with them number 1. Number 2, I'm going to go with I'm actually going to go with Creed. I don't understand the Creed hate.
Gross.
I do think Creed is a solid band. I'll go with Creed. Black Crowes 3rd. I'll go with Sheryl Crow 4th, and then Better Than Ezra 5th, just because I don't know who they are.
That is that sort of speaks to the disposable nature of 90s alternative music, because in 95, they had not just 1, but 2 of the top 5 alternative songs for the year. I mean, they were pretty big.
See, now I'm going to have to go do my research and look them up on YouTube or something. So.
Yeah, look up Good. Like, Good is a song you probably have heard and didn't know who
you're probably right. I'd probably have to agree with you there.
All right, I will go Black Crowes, number 1. They're not just my favorite band on this list. They are actually one of my favorite bands ever. I am someone that never felt shame about liking Hootie and the Blowfish. I still think they're great. So I'll go Hootie, number 2. I'll go Better Than Ezra 3. And then Sheryl Crow or Creed. I mean, they're both garbage. Throw them in a hat. You can pick out whichever one you want at 4 or 5. All right, number 2. You are taking a cross-country road trip. Would you rather be stuck in the car with an Alabama fan that won't shut up about how jealous everyone is of their program, or an Ole Miss fan that won't shut up about the NCAA being out to get them?
It's a tough one.
What the hell is going on in your neighborhood, by the way?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on outside. Sorry about that. I'm going to say... I mean, I guess I'd go Alabama fan, honestly, just because I really don't want to hear about the NCAA stuff from the Ole Miss fan. It's like,
right.
Listen, they're not out to get you. Like, you did this. I mean, it's at least Alabama. It's kind of like, well, I mean, you're sort of right. I mean,
Yeah, having gone to school at Alabama when those fans were still talking that way and we were going 4-8 every year, like I could accept that kind of talk now that people are legit envious of that program, right? I cannot do conspiracy theories in college football. I just can't. It's a big part of the reason why, yes, I was rooting for South Carolina in that game anyway, because I do like South Carolina. They are one of the teams I root for in this sport. I just can't do NC State's constant conspiracy theories from their fan base about how the ACC is out to get them. So I don't think I could do a cross-country road trip hearing from an Ole Miss fan about the NCAA being out to get them when we all saw on national television Larry Tunsil admitting to just how dirty that program was.
Yeah, we've literally seen it on TV. It's like,
all right.
Like we get it.
Number 3, to me, there's a very obvious answer to this question, but I'll be interested in what you say. Which SEC head coach looks like he has the worst breath?
This is a tough one too. I've got a couple ideas, but
okay,
I'm sort of now I'm wondering what you're thinking.
To me, it is undoubtedly Brett Bielema. Brett Bielema looks like he survives on a diet of Polish sausage.
I wouldn't doubt that. I was actually going to think Ed Orgeron. I don't know. There's just something about him.
Ed Orgeron,
with his voice,
right?
I don't know, man. He's such a football guy. He probably doesn't even believe in brushing his teeth or something crazy like that. Who knows? It
is possible because he is such a country dude. It is possible that he just chews and swallows tobacco. Like it's very possible he doesn't spit at all.
No, yeah. I mean,
okay.
Yeah, I like the Bielema answer. I could see that for sure.
Who else, by the way, was on your list?
This one might surprise you. I was thinking like Kevin Sumlin.
Kevin Sumlin is not a crazy one to me because I did when I wrote this question out, I did have this thought because I think, and I may be completely wrong on this, I think Sumlin kind of has some pretty yellow teeth, right? Like that's kind of the sign of.
He always looks like he's got a dip in to me. I know he doesn't, but he always looks like he's got a dip in. Like I don't know what it is.
Yeah,
he's got the shades on, the whole thing going. I don't know.
All right, number 4. What percent chance is there? And I sent you a link to this so that you could enjoy it. What percent chance is there that an SEC game this entire season will give us a GIF even half as enjoyable as Frank Beamer swaying back and forth with the Black Diamond Trophy?
Yeah, first off, that GIF is just amazing. It is so awkward. It's so beautiful. It's so Frank Beamer in so many different ways. What are the chances that we get one even half as entertaining? I'm going to say they're actually pretty good just because the SEC East is just a dumpster fire, if you will. So I just think something weird will happen. I don't know. That one is going to be hard to top, though. I'm going to give you that. That's going to be very hard to top.
Like, if you're listening to this podcast because you are a diehard SEC fan, Chris lives in North Carolina. I live in North Carolina. I've been covering the ACC longer than I've been covering the SEC. Chris, just by virtue of being in the area, probably knows how much of a meme Frank Beamer has become just by being Frank Beamer. I mean, every Saturday you were going to see someone tweet out the photo of Frank Beamer, hands in the air triumphantly because he played his team into a 0-0 tie with Wake Forest. There's a great photo. There's a great photo that was going around the internet last year of Frank Beamer on the Winnie the Pooh ride at Disney World with his grandson. He's a delight, and now that he's lost all that weight, he looks like Barney Fife, like to a T. He looks like Don Knotts as Barney Fife.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, Beamer ball. It'll never. I don't think it'll ever die. I think Virginia Tech could not even be good at special teams, but somebody, hey, Beamer ball. You never know. I mean, I don't think it'll ever die. To be honest,
I do think Beamer ball is as associated with walking out of the tunnel to Metallica's Inner Sandman as it is with blocking punts. Right, like there's just an overall aura of that program that he created. Right, like that was a nothing program before.
You just come in, you're like, oh crap, there we go.
Right. All right. Last one, and this is something we've sort of been hinting at the entire show. Who has more job security right now as we record this, 10:01 p.m. on Tuesday? Who has more job security right now, Kevin Sumlin or literally any member of the Trump administration?
Oh my gosh. For the time being, I'm going to go Kevin Sumlin just because I don't think he'll get fired after one game.
Okay.
And I don't trust anything about I just don't trust anything about the Trump administration and what could happen with that. I don't follow politics a whole lot, to be perfectly honest with you, but I just know that it's, there's no job security. It doesn't exist.
The report is he's already gotten bored of his new chief of staff, and John Kelly could be out of a job at some point. I will say this. Like,
give me someone.
Along what you said, it did to sort of back that up a little bit. I sent some text to some reporter friends on Monday morning out in Texas, just to see if they would tell me what they knew. And one buddy of mine told me that he has been sending texts all day long after the loss on Sunday, and he thinks that Sumlin is definitely out at the end of the season, but the Board of Regents does not have the votes to do it right now, so they probably will not even try until another devastating loss or until this team, suddenly is 2-3, 2-4.
Yeah, I mean, you can't fire a guy after one game, but man, who had a tougher weekend?
Okay. Normally I'd agree with you, but can you not? Like, if your AD says the dude is on the hot seat and he blows that kind of lead, like, forget the Atlanta Falcons are off the hook now in terms of blowing leads.
And you have a Board of Regents member go to Facebook and basically blast your head coach. That was a crazy game to watch. That was one of the craziest games of the weekend. But yeah, I mean, people are kind of saying, I think middle of the year could be very realistic. For example, if he loses to South Carolina at home, if he loses some of these other small games, gets upended where games they should win, who knows? And if they get embarrassed by Alabama or anybody else, I mean, who knows, man? It's not a good time to be Kevin Sumlin, that's for sure.
Yeah, I would say UCLA is not done being a thorn in Kevin Sumlin's side. If they start to slide and it becomes clear they're going to fire Jim Moore, who is on as hot of a seat coming into the season as Kevin Sumlin was, I would bet dollars to donuts A&M strikes first and tries to get a conversation going with Chip Kelly before UCLA does. Because A&M invested a ton of money into that program when they joined the SEC. They do not see themselves as being in Texas's shadow anymore. They are now, they want to show the college football world that Texas is in their shadow, and that's the way the order should be. So I would not be surprised at all if, someone is sitting there at even 4-2, right? And it looks like UCLA might get the first crack at Chip Kelly, so A&M pulls the trigger.
Yeah, what I was going to say, speaking of Texas, who had the worst weekend? The Aggies, the Longhorns, or Baylor? All three had.
I think this is. I think it's Baylor, honestly, because not only did they lose, I mean, you saw the way the culture of that school was around the whole Art Briles stuff. They don't want a different AD. They want Ian McCaw to still be their athletic director. And the fact that he brought Little Liberty into Waco and beat them. And despite what the scoreboard said, like, Liberty led that game the whole way through. This is Liberty's signature moment.
Yeah, shout out to the Flames. That's a heck of a win.
Turner Gill got a signature Big 12 win after being fired at Kansas.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's crazy.
All right, we will I guess we'll do it again next week, right?
Absolutely.
All right, later, nerds.